Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Briancrombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you tonight to Ashok Bhattacharya. He is a psychiatrist, and he's got a really fascinating take on empathy and empathy as it relates to the imposter syndrome. And so I wanted to chat with him a little bit about that tonight. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me back. We had a very illustrative and illuminating conversation last year, and I think it's time to have a rechat about this, because I think that these issues of imposter syndrome are all around us, especially since we're going back in person to the workplace.
Yeah.
Because for almost 3 years, we have enough social distance to keep away from each other, and that gives a chance for people, especially us introverts, to feel our comfort zones. And now we're back in my case, client facing again. We're measuring our value from a different perspective.
So let's take a step back. Tell us, please, what is the imposter syndrome?
I think the imposter syndrome is usually experienced by people who have self-esteem, good qualities, they're considerate, they're caring, they're deeply concerned in what other people think about their value. And they're often those people who actually have the qualifications to establish and practice that value. So you typically see it in teachers, doctors, lawyers, professionals, people who've got the credentials, but they worry, gee, is that person over there more qualified than I am, or are they doing a better job? You do not typically see imposter syndrome in people who have narcissistic problems, interestingly.
And so define that. What's a person that has a narcissistic problem?
A narcissistic problem is someone who defends their insecurity on the inside by looking larger than life on the outside. And sometimes that can be very successful. And that people around them will think, oh my gosh, that person is shinier and bigger and more capable than I am. Therefore, they're more capable and I'm less capable.
So many of these, positive thinking gurus and other people talk about fake it till you make it, and come out and be confident and stand tall and try to present yourself as successful. Are you saying that that's narcissistic, or is that an imposter that's trying to get away from being the imposter?
Well, that's a beautifully framed question, Brian. Thank you for pointing that out. And I think that we have to establish the difference between realistic and unrealistic positivity. So if I'm encouraging...
Hold it. That's really interesting. Between realistic and unrealistic positivity.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. Okay, explain, please.
Well, when I used to work on the hospitals, and it was my job to go in the room and tell some person that they're going to die of cancer, and they say, "How long, doctor?" And I said, "Well, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and I'm so sorry." They might say, "Well, is there anything I can do?" And I say, "Well, might want to get your affairs in order, hold your loved ones closer, and maybe start writing some memoirs if you have time." I'm offering some positivity in a very grim story. If I told that person, well, there's a treatment clinic somewhere in South America who can give you pig liver or something, I think that's being actually dangerous. That might be giving a sense of unrealistic positivity that might send that person on a hunt or a discovery for an outcome that might be even worse than what they're going through. So in the medical profession, in really any advice-based profession, one is advised to be careful to offer realistic positivity.
Okay. So what you're saying is that this confidence, or this fake it till you make it, is okay as long as it's realistic, not unrealistic.
I think the fake it till you make it is the way we do it. But if your goals and ideals are so high that they actually are unrealistic, that person might be setting themselves up for chronic disappointment. And a huge issue, let me just get this one out. A huge issue of how we decide what people's personalities is like is how that person copes with disappointment. Think about that. That's a good way to test to see what someone's personality is like.
Okay, so how should we deal with disappointment, even chronic disappointment?
Well, the best way to deal with disappointment is to use gratitude, to see what you do have, to take the loss with some grace. Just watch American Idol for a couple of episodes. You see people who don't take it well if they're not picked for the team, and other people who take it very well. Life is about loss. Eventually, we lose our life, and so we have appointments through our life, and we have disappointments through our life. And if our attitude is essentially towards optimism, again, realistic optimism, our personality can be more thankful and more grateful.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's come back to imposter. So why do so many people have this imposter syndrome?
Well, humans measure our value according to our value to the tribe. We're essentially born insecure, which is why we desperately need each other's positive evaluation to be a member of the tribe. And back in caveman times, back in those times, if you weren't a member of the tribe, you did not survive. And just because we've invented a world where we can live in separate unit dwellings called apartments and be single and be essentially away from people does not mean that we've lost that core issue of needing to belong. And the need to belong is one of the most powerful connectors that we have in human culture. And if we belong because we have value, i.e., I'm useful to the tribe, or I'm useful to the team, I'm useful to the corporation, then we can be comfortable and content in our sense that we belong positively. Because we often don't give each enough feedback on the issue of our value, especially back in medicine, back in the 70s and 80s when I was training, you end up with the sense that you're not good enough. And if you carry that right through to your adult life, you can have this voice inside your head saying, well, I could be better. I should have done more. I should have stayed longer. I should have worked harder. And instead of saying I've done a good enough job, and that's appropriate and accurate, that negative voice can begin to grow inside of us, especially as you so accurately pointed out. There's other people who are big and shiny and celebrating their narcissism, unbeknownst to the world around them. Then that person can start to feel like they're an imposter.
But isn't that good if we want to strive to better ourselves and better our companies and better our communities? Isn't it good if we're not satisfied with what is and want more?
It absolutely is good if we're satisfied, yet if we want more. And I call that discontentment within contentment. So
discontentment, but within contentment.
Correcto. So if we learn to be more content and we have pockets of discontentment inside that, we can strive to be better. But we're not essentially a miserable person who's chronically depressed and dissatisfied with themselves or their relationships or their career. And I've seen evidence of this in other cultures where these cultures are less driven by greed. And people generally seem to be happier. In North America, we have the North American dream where anyone can run the country. Anyone can become a multimillionaire. And that sets people up to believe that what they have may not be enough. And if what you have is not enough, then you have contentment within discontentment. In other words, you're chronically discontent. If we reverse that, where we have discontentment inside contentment, I think we can manage that, what I said earlier, that disappointment issue a little better.
Fascinating. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more, talking about the imposter syndrome, talking about narcissism, talking about contentment, discontent within contentment, and it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having an interesting conversation with Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya. He is a psychiatrist. We're talking about the imposter syndrome tonight. Dr. Bhattacharya, maybe take a step back if you could. Explain to everyone what the difference is between a psychiatrist and a psychologist.
Okay. So when someone goes to university and they decide that they want to work in the social sciences, they have a choice to work as a social worker, and that's anywhere from a master's to a PhD program. And you get to work with people and talk about people's emotions and social life. The psychologist will focus more on the mental life of somebody, and that can also be a master's or a PhD. And the psychiatrist is someone who's gone through a medical training. So you have to get a medical doctor degree, So that means that you can prescribe medications and deliver babies and all that kind of stuff. And then you go on to a specialty called psychiatry, which is another 4 to 5 years. And once you finish that, you can open an office or work in a hospital as a psychiatrist, essentially treating mental disorders, or what I do, which is I'm a psychotherapist.
And so why did you decide to specialize in empathy?
I think empathy is something that we all feel, but we don't use it in psychiatry enough. And the only way to really understand what somebody else is going through is to find out what they're going through. So if I ask 10 people, do you feel depressed? And they all say yes, then I could put them on a medication and see them a couple of months later, and hopefully some of them would be feeling better. But if I ask them, what are you depressed about? And how does your depression feel to you? I might get a better sense of what's actually causing them the emotions that they're experiencing. And my help, which may also include a medication, might be more directed to the source of what's causing that feeling that they're having.
And psychiatrists are able to prescribe medications, and psychologists and social workers and all those other people that don't have the medical training are not. But right. Empathy doesn't sound to me like a thing that I would have expected a psychiatrist to be so involved in.
Well, thank you for that huge compliment. I think empathy is the tool that we all use to discover how each of us feel. And we're using it subconsciously all the time, and sometimes we bring it forth consciously and use it to investigate how each of us are feeling. For example, Brian, I'm happily married, but before I was happily married, I used to date. And I remember if you're going out with a person and you've just met, in this case, for me, it would be a young woman, and the night's over and you're leaning in for that first electrical moment of a kiss, and you're thinking, what does she feel? Is she okay with this? And because you can't often ask, hey, is it okay if I give you a kiss? We have to use our empathic senses to sense whether or not that will be okay, appropriate, consented to, and pleasant to our new partner. So I think we're using empathic resonance all the time to sense what somebody else is feeling, and would it be okay to engage that person a little deeper, whether it's a kiss or whether it's in a professional engagement with someone or a radio interview.
I chatted recently with someone who I think you know, Anita Nowak, who spoke a lot about empathy. I guess she studies it and has written books and is writing books about it. And I think her thesis is that it's critically important, more so today than ever, and that it is a attribute that we have not used as much as we should have in the last decades or generations, frankly, as we became very authoritarian in our management styles, our leadership styles, our interactions. But it's something that we desperately need and need more of today. Does that hold any resonance to you?
Well, it absolutely. I'm a big fan of Anita Novak. I think that what's happened is that culture has moved, especially in large industrialized cultures, from a village mentality to like the megatropolis mentality. And so I grew up in Newfoundland, which essentially is a village mentality, where you drive around town, it takes 20 minutes. You know almost everybody knows you. Privacy is a little bit difficult in that kind of environment, but you know people. So when people get married at the church, everybody knows everybody. They're not kind of leaning over saying, who are they? But when I came out to Toronto back in 1985, I realized this is a large anonymous culture. People don't know each other. They also avoid each other. They walk right past each other. They don't smile. They don't say hello. They don't say, how you doing? Or g'day, mate, if they're in Australia. And I just think that this sense that I'm all alone in this massive city. And I felt very lonely when I first came to Toronto. I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to? I thought more people, more friends. Absolutely not. Less. So empathy, I think, as we get into these bigger anonymous cultures, we feel more and more alienated from each other. And if empathy is the connection, the way that we actually connect to people, but we're living in these bigger places. More people are getting on planes, moving away from their families, living in different countries, etc., which is great. Diversity is great. But I think we need to practice that empathic connection, especially in places like our families, our close relationships, and maybe even in the workplace as well.
Why? Why is it something that we don't do naturally? Why is it something that people like you and Anita Nowak have to encourage us to do?
Well, Brian, we do it naturally. But I think what's happened is that when we're with people that we don't know, the first response when we're with people that we don't know is to step back from them and try and study to see if they're safe. And think about this with babies. When they're born, they don't get stranger anxiety until they're just a few months old. And then they start to get stranger anxiety, which is a natural response to, I don't know you. I know this group of people around me, but I don't know you. We actually have stranger anxiety for the rest of our life. And when we know people, we're calmer, our blood pressures are lower, we're more relaxed. If we don't know people, we're more paranoid. We're putting more energy in that kind of alienation part of our brain, where we're separating ourselves from people around us, rather than investigating, jumping in, and acting like a Newfoundlander.
And so stranger alienation, you say, is natural. It's in our DNA?
It's in our DNA. We have our tribe over here, and that tribe over there are either going to steal our things or kill us or rape our partners, etc. Yes, it's in our DNA.
Is that where racism comes? And does that suggest racism is natural?
I think that's a really good point. I think that's where judgment comes from. Yes.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got this empathy that you think is natural, but more important and more called for, or we've got to encourage it more in our current society. I had this one person on who said that there's a spectrum, and that empathy, the way that they described it, is sort of this mirror neuron that empathy that Anita Nowak and I talked about, and what it does is it allows you to feel the emotions, the fear, the love, the whatever of another person. But that sympathy was less than that, because sympathy was just sort of feeling bad for someone without feeling what they were feeling. But that empathy, you could feel empathetic and not do anything about it. You had to take that one step farther to compassion, to actually put empathy to work and do something about it. And the way they described it, it was that compassion was a verb and empathy was just static. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, well, I have lots to say about that, so I won't confuse our audience too much. But I simplify this a lot. I think sympathy is a good emotion. I don't necessarily just align it with pity. I think when I'm feeling simpatico with someone, we're feeling the same thing. So if you go to Yuck Yucks and everyone's laughing, the audience is feeling a similar emotion. In fact, that's why people look around when they're laughing at Yuck Yucks, because they want to make sure that everyone's got a similar emotion. If I go to a funeral and everyone's crying, again, everyone's in simpatico. They're sympathizing for the same idea. Empathy coincides with sympathy. So if you're feeling something that somebody else is feeling and you're resonating with their feelings, you're empathizing with them, you happen to be feeling the same feeling yourself. But if someone's feeling a feeling that you're not feeling, and you're trying to put yourself aside so that you can engage their feeling and understand their feeling from their perspective, that's empathy. That's the difference for me. And I think when we practice empathy, we don't have to agree with that person. In fact, we don't have to do anything about it. We can simply resonate that person's experience within ourselves. Once we've resonated and taken that Polaroid picture, we can look at that and decide, do I want to do something about it? That's compassion. Then when you think, yeah, I'm actually going to do something about it, that's kindness. And so for me, I like to lean on the side of empathy, compassion, kindness continuum, rather than empathy, meanness, and hatred, because empathy doesn't mean that you like the person. In fact, some people use empathy for very negative reasons, like psychopaths do. But I think sympathy for me is simply when we feel the same feeling.
This is fast. You confused the heck out of me right there. Some people use empathy for negative reasons, like psychopaths. Explain that, please.
Well, to me, a psychopath is someone who might actually have quite a bit of empathy, but they completely lack remorse. So they may delight in the pain and suffering and fear that they're causing that person. They're enjoying that feeling that they're empathizing with, that they're causing in their victim, but they don't feel bad about it. Most of us, if we tread on someone else's toes or shortchange somebody, we feel bad. But some people they have no sense of remorse at all. They just don't feel bad. And they know how to fake that momentarily, but they don't feel bad. That's what being a psychopath actually is, a lack of remorse.
So I always thought empathy had only good traits. You're saying empathy can have good and bad traits.
Empathy is the capacity to see how somebody else feels. You can use that for positive or negative reasons. You know, when someone's pushing your buttons, that they know what buttons to push because they know which ones set you off. So that can have a negative purpose. Exactly right.
Absolutely fascinating. And kindness and compassion, you say, are different. Explain to me, if you could, the difference in kindness and compassion.
I think compassion is the idea to want to do something good for somebody else, and kindness is the actual act. So if I see someone who's limping in the streets and there's a flight of stairs, I might think, oh, that person's having some difficulty. I'm trying to empathize with them. Oh, I could help them up those stairs. And the minute I ask them, would it be all right if I try to help you up those stairs, and offer them my hand, now I'm being kind. So I kind of see it as kindness is the actual verb part of compassion.
Really? And so when Anita Nowak was talking to me about the empathetic civilization and we need more empathy, do we just really need more kindness?
Absolutely, Brian. Thank you so much for saying that, because that really is the key phrase. Because empathy alone is simply just a photograph of an event. Compassion is thinking what to do about it, and kindness is what we actually do about it. And if kindness, and this is really key, hopefully what I'm going to say next, if kindness is guided by a good empathic image, then we can actually do something that's very useful. Otherwise, we're going to end up with combine harvesters in Ethiopia.
So this is interesting. So what you're saying is empathy is feeling something. Compassion is wanting to do something to improve that situation, and kindness is actually doing it. But what you're saying, I guess, is kindness without empathy means that we might just do something and it might not be of any value. And we're just trying to do it to be kind rather than kind because we actually know what the person needs or is suffering from.
Well, that's what happened. They said Ethiopia has a problem with food, so they don't have combine harvesters, so let's send them all over. They sent them all over, and now they've got hundreds of rusting combine harvesters in the desert in Ethiopia doing nothing because that wasn't the solution that was applicable to them.
Okay, so where does this come back to the imposter syndrome? How does the imposter syndrome got anything to do with empathy?
I think if people have self-empathy, which means that they're able to look within themselves and see their true value, and maybe not listen so much to that negative voice of I don't have value, and then listen to what other people are saying to them, because other people will often tell someone who has imposter syndrome, oh, you're great, you have value, we rely on you, you're amazing, and try and empathize with other people's sense of your value. Then that can help elevate your sense of worth to the point where you're not doubting that you have value at all. You're actually realizing, okay, maybe I don't think I'm that amazing, but other people seem to have value in that. So I'm going to turn up and show up because I'm going to serve my tribe.
Is self-empathy very different than empathy?
Absolutely not. Self-empathy is simply looking within yourself and resonating at a different time in your life. So my favorite one is future self-empathy, where you're imagining yourself in 5 years from now. And sometimes we have an exercise. Write a letter to yourself in 5 years that you'll open up in 5 years and read right at that point about where you are right now. What would you say to yourself in 5 years if you could look at where you're at now and get your 5 years from now advice about what to do now? And I think that's often a powerful mechanism of being able to not be completely snowed in by the emotions of the moment, and be able to kind of forward think yourself and think consequentially, hopefully positively, that can give you the kind of advice that would be maybe more realistic and helpful to you.
What a great idea. Do you actually tell some of your patients or people to do this? Write a letter to themselves 5 years from
All
5 years
the
from
time.
now?
All the time. It's one of my standards.
I had somebody tell me that one of the things that you should do is write the eulogy that you would like someone to say at your funeral, and to see if that has any resonance with the life that you're actually living.
Yeah, one of my lines is every day is an opportunity to change your eulogy, which means you could add something positive to it.
Every day is an opportunity to change your eulogy.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's really interesting.
Thank you.
We're going to take another break and come back in just a couple of minutes and talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome and how we get over it. Because I do think that I've heard this term over and over and over again. And it's something that I don't think I didn't understand until this conversation nearly as well as I could have and should have. And so I think that the doctor is going to have some helpful suggestions to us. Everybody, hang around. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya. He is a psychiatrist, and he's an expert on and someone that's very passionate about empathy. And we've been talking about empathy on the spectrum, which is really kind of interesting, starting with sympathy to empathy, which is feeling someone else's issues, to compassion, where you want to do something with whatever that problem is, and then actual kindness, where you actually take action and actually do something to solve the problem. I love that. We've also talked a little bit about how every day is a day to change your eulogy for the positive. And I think that's a very powerful idea. And too often, I think we forget that every day there's an opportunity to show kindness. But Doctor, maybe we can go back to this idea that you talked about off the top of the imposter syndrome. I've been hearing a lot, reading a lot, that for some reason females have the imposter syndrome to a far greater degree than men. And I had one person tell me that this is because too many men, from a young age, are told to be confident, and females aren't. And there was actually a study done of stick figures with young teens, and stick figures that were standing tall and stick figures that were not standing tall. And males and females and young teens identified the ones standing tall as male and the ones that were not standing tall or weaker looking as female. Is there something about our society that is conditioning us to believe that females are weaker, that are imposters?
Well, interestingly, females are stronger. So female embryos are stronger than male embryos. The X chromosome is a great big chromosome. The Y chromosome is this little tiny thing in the corner. And so it's just interesting. Women live longer than men. They have stronger legs. They tolerate pain more. They get sick less often. So I break it down to spears and baskets, Brian. So back in tribal times, all a guy had to have was a spear and go out and get a gazelle, drag it back and feed the tribe and hero for the day. A woman can go out with a basket, and all she has to do is pick one poisonous mushroom, bring it back to the tribe, and kill a few people. And her name is a bad name for a long time. So women have a lot of pressure to get it right. Men have way less pressure to get it right. And and I'm a feminist, but I think the feminist movement has created tremendous struggle for women, because now they've got equality of stress. They're ahead of men on burnout. They have the same incidence of stroke, and yes, they can have hopefully equal opportunity careers, but they're also wives, mothers, and they've got all these other things that they do full time, and so it's a very stressful experience, I think, for women. I think that imposter syndrome, if we look at it as measuring ourselves against other people, I think women have more issues to measure. I can go out to a party wearing a shirt and jeans and fit in, but if a woman goes out and she's not dressed to the right attire and she's not got her makeup on, her eyelash curler and things like, have you ever used an eyelash curler, Brian?
I have never used an eyelash curler.
Right? Think about it. It's think about what they have to go through, and women, and are very judgy of each other. And when I listen to women in my office, they talk about men who can be judged them, but they really talk about women who judge them. So I wish women would champion each other a little bit more, be a little less judgmental. I think that's why imposter syndrome is stronger for women than men.
You think women are more judgy or judgy of each
Of
other?
each other? Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Why?
Because back in the kind of caveman times, uh, a man could establish his alpha maleness simply by size, brawn, and perhaps intelligence. A woman had to establish her alpha status by looks and how beguiling she was, how manipulative she was. And I think and some of course are very successful. I think it's tougher for women to establish their superiority because of those issues. And if you're a nice, kind woman and you don't want to be manipulative and you have imposter syndrome, you're going to be doubtful. Doesn't matter how amazing looking you are, how qualified you are, you're going to be more doubtful than a guy who's fairly average looking but's doing well, and everyone slaps him on the back and calls him a hero.
You said something interesting I want to come back to. You said beguiling and manipulative.
Yes.
I always thought those were two different things. One was a positive and one's a negative. You're saying they're both negative?
No, I think manipulation by itself is not negative. It's how it's used. I'm quite a manipulative character, and I try to manipulate my patients out of their depression into joy and optimism. And yeah, manipulation is getting someone else to do something they don't want to do. If you get someone to do something that's bad for them, then that's bad manipulation. If you get them to do something that's good for them, then that actually works. If we tell our child, don't smoke cigarettes, and we find there's some cigarettes in their bedroom, and we say you're grounded for a week, we're manipulating them, but it's good manipulation.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I never thought of that. I guess I thought that convincing or something like that, persuading, convincing was a positive, but manipulation was a negative. You're saying it can be positive. That's interesting.
Well, it's like empathy. It depends how you use it. If I manipulate someone to do something good, it's still manipulation, but I'm hopefully using it for the right purpose.
Beguiling is, I guess I would have thought, sort of like sex appeal or charisma, yeah, or erotic capital. I read a book about that and interviewed the author. And for a long time, people wanted to dumb that down, diminish it, because they thought that was unfair.
Well, I think we all have our personalities. Some people have more charisma than others. Some people are more attractive than others on a variety of scales. Some people are simply more engaging. And we have this shiny part to our personalities that either is hidden or not. Now, some people know how to exemplify that, and other people hide that, especially the imposter syndrome crowd. And so I think to be able to manufacture, exemplify, and perhaps even use that sensibility is what makes us appear to be confident. So people love confident people.
Yeah.
And confidence is way more infectious than self-esteem.
Self-esteem. Hold it. What's the difference between confidence and self-esteem?
Self-esteem is the accumulation of your successes, what you've already done in the past. And confidence is the belief that you'll be successful in something new in the future.
Really? That's interesting. Self-esteem is an accumulation of our past successes, and confidence is a belief that we'll be successful in the future.
Yeah. That's the simplest way that I think about it.
I've never thought about that way. It's interesting. I had another person tell me that there was a big difference between confidence and self-confidence, because too often confidence can become arrogance. But self-confidence is confidence in yourself that you don't need to exude to others. Does that make any sense?
Well, confidence is actually a term in statistics. When we talk about confidence intervals and confidence levels and what's the confidence of this outcome being positive. So in statistics, if you're flipping a nickel, there's a 50% chance it's going to be heads or tails, and you're confident in making that prediction. When we stretch confidence to something that's, going back to the beginning of our conversation today, unrealistic, now we're introducing it something that we can properly get people to believe, like this little oil will cure all of your ills, and we're going to leave town once we've sold everybody this little oil. Then that's when we're using confidence in a somewhat injurious way.
Manipulative way. Okay, so we've been talking about empathy. We've been talking about the imposter syndrome. How do you get out of the imposter syndrome?
I think the imposter syndrome is really helpful to talk to somebody else about. And I actually belong to a group in Australia, of all things, and it's called the Thriving Doctor Group. And I'm amazed how many doctors have imposter syndrome. But when they start talking to each other and valuing each other and empowering each other so that you can actually look at your self-esteem, say, look what you've done. You've done a good job here. So it's likely you're going to do okay over here. And support each other and create that tribal connection where we feel like we're belonging and we have value. That can be a powerful antidote to that isolated feeling that I'm not good enough.
So talking about it with others.
Exactly. I think that's a powerful way to share the feeling. I have doubt in myself. And once you realize everyone else does, a healthy amount of doubt is good. Too much doubt is bad.
Yeah. I wonder, is some of it just getting out there and getting in the flow? Somebody, I think it was actually, I can't remember now who it was, but someone said 80% of life is just showing up and just getting out there. And I think that there's some people I know who, I don't know, obviously I don't have your training, but I would have thought have the imposter syndrome, and they're always doubting themselves, and therefore they don't take risks. They don't put themselves out there. They always think they're going to be unsuccessful or worry they're going to be unsuccessful. And then other people that maybe they're overconfident. I don't know. Maybe they're realistically confident and positive about life, and they put themselves out there and it works out. And so isn't some of it just getting out there and trying and showing up?
Well, you raise yet another brilliant point, Brian, and that is the capacity to come up with a great idea and then the capacity to market it. And we know that some people can invent something, but they're horrible at marketing. And so nobody ever finds out their idea. And somebody else can invent something that's kind of average, but they're brilliant at marketing, and they can bring it to the marketplace. So marketing self is not the same as having self-value or having credentials. And because now we have the opportunity for people to market themselves, not everyone's comfortable. Not everyone's. I mean, I go out to bars once a week and get up on the stage and sing and play. And to me, that's an important. And doing that really improves my confidence because I'm actually marketing something about me. And when we practice marketing, and doctors aren't trained to market at all, I can tell you that. When you practice marketing, you actually build your confidence. You practice that capacity to say, when I get up there, I'm going to be okay. People are going to like it. I'm going to have fun. Everyone's going to enjoy it. I belong. This is my tribe, etc. And then we can actually practice that marketing thing. I think marketing is not the same as coming up with a good idea.
And so everyone should pick up a guitar and start playing in gigs in local bars?
Well, I think if you think about it, most basic cultures have rituals around getting together and dancing or getting together and singing. And when we celebrate those things as a group, it does empower each other. If someone wants to get up and sing and play, I think that's okay. But they can get together and have a talk. They can get together and go out for a meal. They can go see a movie and then talk about it for an hour after the movie's over. They can experience that connection where people are sharing, admiring, and appreciating each other. I think that builds that sense of that erodes imposter syndrome, or builds a sense of certainly self-esteem, but also confidence.
So it sounds like there's something to do with this whole Toastmasters idea of just learning how to speak in front of other people and practicing it gives you confidence in a whole bunch of different areas of life.
Well, before we invented books and printing, the only way we communicated was by speaking. And if you were shy and introverted and you belonged to a tribe and no one really heard you speak that much, you would not be selected as an alpha member of that tribe. And the most outspoken person would be the person who would eventually lead the tribe, but they may not be the most qualified, either intellectually or in the personality area.
Okay, so if you had a patient or a friend that had the imposter syndrome, the number one thing you would do is talk about it, because you said being in a group of people that communicate about it is helpful because you feel that connection to other people, particularly other people that may have, I guess you said, other people that have the similar imposter syndrome, and then it's reinforcing to chat about it with other people. And then the second thing you suggested is that you get out there and try it, whether it be by speaking or singing or dancing or playing or Toastmasters or something, but getting out there. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's good to sit down and you don't have to write your memoirs, but just write out on a piece of paper some of the key points that you felt successful in your life. What are my top shelf moments when I felt good about myself? And if you've got a few, that's what we think about when we're going through times of grief or when we're going through times of suffering or we're going through miserable times. You think about the times when, okay, I felt good there, I felt good about something there. And that it's likely if I can get through this space, then I'll have another good emotion, another good experience in the future as well. So to be able to think that kind of realistic positivity about what you've already achieved, that can help you get through to a future moment where you will achieve again.
Some great advice. Do you think that there's more and more people that are getting this imposter syndrome, or is there something about our current society that means it's more prevalent?
I think there's more people who are getting imposter syndrome, largely because we've stretched out adolescence now to, instead of 13 years to about 18, we've stretched it out to the mid-20s. And the more industrialized a culture is, the longer their adolescence is. And if adolescence is a period of time of self-exploration to decide who and what you want to do with your life, and it's now taking double the length of time, we're creating way more existential angst around who am I? What am I going to do? Am I doing the right thing? What's everyone else doing? Am I going to fit in? And we're stretching that out. And I think that's why we're seeing so much more imposter syndrome, especially in people in their 20s and 30s.
God, this is really fascinating. You think that we've stretched adolescence out almost by 50% from 13 years to 18 years. This is a whole nother conversation we got to have. This is a fascinating one. But you know what? We're almost out of time. We're going to have to take a break for some messages. And we're going to come back in just 2 minutes. And I'm going to ask if we can have a quick summary of this idea of adolescence growing in time dramatically. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya, and he's a psychiatrist, and we've been talking about empathy and the imposter syndrome and kindness. It's been really fascinating. But then, doctor, you came out with this thing right near the end here that adolescence has increased from 13 years to 18 years. And you're saying that that's natural in an industrialized society. Why the heck do you think that's happening?
Well, I think when I went to university, there's only a couple of choices that we could have. Now the choices are unlimited as to what people can do. And I think that we've increased life expectancy from 50 and back in 1945 to 80. Women are having children in their 30s instead of their early 20s. And the expectation of someone to act like an adult isn't really happening until they're sometimes they're mid to late 20s. And so that leaves a much bigger chunk of time. That leaves a much bigger chunk of time when people are kind of lost. And teenagers often don't ask their parents, like they're not following. Back in farming culture, for example, you just work on the farm. And when your parents pass on, you just keep working on the farm. There's no farm. I mean, there are farms here, but it's created a tremendous amount of angst over what should I do and how can I make my mark? And I think the dread that we're feeling in the younger population is much bigger than it used to be.
So, I read a book about I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it was about the 20s being the scariest generation, and that it was sort of the extension of adolescence. And people used to become an adult at 18 and are now becoming an adult at like 28.
Right.
And that they're staying with their parents a lot longer. They're staying in school a lot longer. They're taking a lot longer to, as you said, have children, get a mortgage, get a job that starts their career, etc. And you're saying this is because we've given people a lot more choices, or our industrialized society just has a lot more choices. Is that good or bad then?
I think it just is. I think human beings are creative. We invented the wheel. That changed our life. We invented agriculture. We invented refrigeration. That changed us. And we invented airplanes. So that changed us. So everything we do has consequences to what we do. Do we think about how that's going to change culture? Well, Not so much. We implement it, we apply it, and then we look later on what was the consequence of that. Some of those are amazing. I mean, who could live without a cell phone now? But when we were kids, we never thought about cell phones. It just didn't happen. We wanted to see someone, we went and saw them. And so what we've done to change culture is going to have significant impact on how we are as human beings. And we're starting to see some of the fallout of that, I think, certainly in the adolescents and people in their 20s.
So I do think this could be a whole nother conversation and show, and maybe I'll ask you if we can have you back in the future. But let's come back to the imposter syndrome then. So for people in their 20s that are going through this extended adolescence time period that you're talking about, that are trying to figure out who they are, what they want to do, where they want to be in the future, and they have this imposter syndrome, are your suggestions the same?
My suggestions are the same. I think that we need to have more opportunities for younger people to talk to older people who probably aren't their parents, but people who are mentors. We used to have mentors everywhere. Now, when my kids went to university, I said, "Have you met your professor?" I said, "No. There's 1,000 people in the class, and we've met the TAs." So the idea that we're shrinking the elder culture, where people can actually sit down and have those meaningful conversations on lessons of life, if you will. I think that would be a wonderful thing to implement, and that way we can have a little bit of guidance that is not judgmental. So if someone says, I'd like to go be a rock star, or I'd want to be a doctor, doesn't matter what they want to do, they can flush out those conversations in a healthy way and feel confident that they can share those passions, not be judged, and maybe begin to work on that eulogy so that they can achieve in their life what they want to.
Mentorship, having other people you can talk to about your challenges, your fears, your concerns, and just getting out there and giving it a try, speaking, talking, singing, dancing, getting up on stage like our psychiatrist tonight, and just giving it a try. I think all great suggestions. Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya, thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about empathy, about the imposter syndrome, about adolescence growing in time, and some of your suggestions on how to deal with all that. Really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much. Brian, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful host today. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody.